Her wedding day. She waited. The groom never showed. But when all seemed lost, a stranger appeared with a proposal that would change her life forever. Who was he? And why did he want to marry her? Nothing happens by chance, and destiny still holds big surprises. Watch now and tell me in the comments, how far would you go to change your fate? The unconventional proposal. A second chance at the altar. Lucy Thorne's dress was simple, without glitter or extravagance. A straight cut with thin straps, a light drape that touched the floor without dragging. There was no lace or jewels, just plain white fabric that subtly embraced her body. Her hair, gathered in a low bun, highlighted the delicacy of her nape and the softness of the small pearl earrings she wore. She wanted something discreet, practical, because she always believed the moment was most important, not the spectacle. The registry office was full, but without the glamour of traditional weddings. No flowers scattered around, no ornate altar, no musicians playing. Only the voices of guests, footsteps echoing on the marble floor, and signatures that turned promises into officiality. Still, Lucy felt her heart pound in her chest, not for the formality of the wedding itself, but for the certainty that, in a few minutes, she and Jack Peterson would be husband and wife. After 8 years together, everything would finally become definitive. She smiled to herself, clutching the small bouquet of white roses a little tighter. She glanced at her bridesmaid's wristwatch beside her. 15 minutes late. Jack had always been punctual, but a small, unforeseen delay was normal. A wardrobe malfunction, a last-minute call. Nothing to worry about. 20 minutes. Unease began to spread among the guests. Discreet whispers turned into hushed conversations, and glances began to weigh on Lucy. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself that he would arrive any moment. It was then that she noticed the change in her bridesmaid's expression. The woman, sitting beside her, stared fixedly at her phone. Her eyes were wide, her breath held. Lucy frowned, feeling a strange chill on the back of her neck. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice coming out weaker than she would have liked. Her bridesmaid took a moment to reply, as if searching for the right words. But in the end, she said nothing. She just turned the phone screen towards Lucy, and that's how she knew. The shock came before the pain. On the screen, a newly published photo showed Jack at an airport, smiling next to Mariana Cole. His arm was around her waist, and the caption was cruelly simple: "Ready for a new beginning." Lucy felt as if the world had stopped for a second, as if the air around her became lighter. Her eyes scanned the image, desperately searching for an explanation that made sense, proof that it wasn't what it seemed. But it was. Jack wasn't coming. Jack was with Mariana. The voices around her faded into distant noises, until everything was reduced to that photo glowing on the screen. 8 years of love, promises, and plans reduced to a single instant of blatant betrayal. The murmurs intensified. The guests' expressions varied between shock and pity. And Lucy? Lucy still held the bouquet, her fingers clutching the flowers so tightly that a white petal broke off and fell to the floor. The ultimate betrayal caught on camera. How would you react if your entire future was shattered in a single photo? Share your outrage and heartbreak in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the shocking twist that follows. The white petal slowly slipped to the cold floor of the registry office, a subtle reflection of what Lucy felt inside. Something wilting, crumbling, falling apart before her eyes. The silence around her was deafening, filled only with gazes laden with pity, with whispers that intensified with every second. She wanted to breathe, but the air seemed dense, too heavy to enter her lungs. 8 years thrown away. 8 years, only to be abandoned by a man who didn't even have the dignity to look her in the eye before leaving. The humiliation burned more than the pain. She didn't cry. She didn't allow tears to fall there, in front of everyone. But inside her, something shattered into pieces that could never be repaired. It was then that she felt something. A gaze, across the room, beyond the still murmuring guests. A man watched the scene with a cold, calculating look. Edward Hayes. He shouldn't have been there. He wasn't invited to this wedding. In fact, he was just passing through the registry office when the unusual commotion made him pause for an instant. Someone like him should never have stopped to look at something like this. Failed weddings, public humiliations, and romantic dramas were far from his concerns. But there was something about Lucy that made his eyes fix on her for longer than they should have. Perhaps it was the way she remained standing, even with her soul shattered. Perhaps it was the way her fingers trembled around the bouquet without her noticing. Perhaps it was the keen instinct of a man who knew how to recognize opportunities. And there, right in front of him, was one he couldn't ignore. He didn't think twice. He walked slowly through the room, his firm footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The murmuring subsided as he approached. His name was known. His presence always carried weight. People started turning, surprised, trying to understand what Edward Hayes could want with this woman who had just been abandoned at the altar. Lucy only became aware of his approach when she felt his presence beside her. She turned, confused, meeting a pair of dark, intense eyes fixed on her. He didn't smile. There was no softness in his expression, only determination. "Marry me." The words cut the silence like a sharp blade. Lucy blinked, unable to process what she had just heard. "What?" Her voice came out hoarse, weak, as if it belonged to someone else. "Marry me now," Edward repeated, without altering his tone. "I'll give you protection and a new beginning." The shock of the proposal made her look at him as if he were insane. Her heart, previously crushed by abandonment, now beat at a completely different rhythm. She didn't know him. Of course, she had heard of the Hayes name. Anyone in London knew who that family was. But she had never exchanged a single word with him. And now he was there, in front of everyone, asking her to marry him. "Are you joking?" Her voice came out firmer this time, searching for any sign of irony, of provocation. But Edward Hayes wasn't joking. "I don't usually joke about serious matters." She laughed, a humorless, almost choked laugh. "I've just been abandoned at the altar, and you're proposing marriage. Why?" Edward tilted his head slightly, as if he expected that question. "Because I need a wife, and you need a way out." Lucy didn't respond immediately. The guests' gazes burned on her back, and her mind spun with too much information to process. Jack's photo still glowed on her bridesmaid's phone screen. The caption resonated in her mind like an insult. "Ready for a new beginning." She tasted bitterness in her mouth. Edward watched her intently, noticing every small reaction, every minimal hesitation. He didn't pressure her, didn't insist. He just waited. The truth was, Lucy had nothing to lose. She could leave that registry office humiliated, swallowing her tears, returning home as a woman who was replaced and discarded like nothing. Or she could leave there as Mrs. Hayes. What did she want Jack to see? A destroyed woman? Or an unreachable woman? Lucy's lips parted slightly, her chest rising and falling with accelerated breathing. Her eyes returned to Edward, and something shone within them. "All right," she said, and her own voice surprised her. "Let's do it." Whatever he had expected, Edward Hayes seemed satisfied with her answer. He simply nodded. Good choice. The chaos that followed was inevitable. Guests muttering in surprise, bridesmaids and groomsmen trying to intervene, some questioning her sanity. But Lucy didn't listen to them. As she signed the new register, Her heart still pounded, but no longer for the same reason as before. In a few hours, her name would no longer be Lucy Brooks, and Jack Peterson was no longer part of her story. An audacious choice. What do you think the immediate aftermath of this shocking marriage will be like? Share your predictions in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the continuation of this extraordinary tale. The Unconventional Proposal, A Second Chance at the Altar. Part 3. Lucy didn't look back when she left the registry office with Edward. There was nothing there for her anymore. No explanation, no apology, no look of regret. Jack had already made his decision, and now she made hers. The dry heat of London seemed different that day. The air held a new weight, a meaning she couldn't yet decipher. The car door opened for her, and for the first time in hours, she took a deep breath before getting in. The impeccable black vehicle reflected her own image in the glass, still dressed in white, but not as a happy bride. Her face was no longer that of a woman in love, but of someone reborn from a fire that had burned everything she believed herself to be. Edward got into the car beside her, unhurried, without anxiety. The engine started, and they drove off. No words were exchanged in the first few minutes, only the soft sound of the city in the background, the bustling streets, thoughts swirling between them. Lucy didn't know where to begin. What do you say to a man who, in a matter of minutes, became your husband? You seem calm. Edward broke the silence, his dark eyes observing her with interest. She let out a low laugh, but without humor. What am I supposed to be doing? Crying? Begging him to come back? Many would, he replied, but not you. Lucy turned her face to look at him. Edward didn't seem to say that to provoke her, but as an obvious observation. No, she admitted. Not me. The car glided smoothly through the stone entrance, flanked by perfectly aligned trees, as if every detail had been meticulously planned to convey impressiveness and power. Golden lights illuminated the enormous structure of classical architecture, with imposing columns and wide windows. She had never seen such a grand house up close. The driver stopped the car in front of the main entrance, and an employee stepped forward to open the door. Lucy hesitated for an instant before getting out of the vehicle. The night wind blew against her face, and the weight of the decision she had made finally made itself felt. This place was now her home. Edward got out of this car without saying anything and walked forward, his firm steps echoing on the marble of the entrance. She followed him, feeling her own heart beating fast, as if she were entering unknown territory. And indeed, she was. Crossing the tall, carved wooden doors, Lucy found herself facing a foyer that seemed to belong to a museum. The light marble floor reflected the lights of the enormous chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling. Grand wooden stairs led to the upper floors, and hallways stretched to different rooms of the house. The silence was deep, almost intimidating. She felt small inside. It wasn't just the size of the house. It was the coldness, the absence of something that made it welcoming. Everything was impeccable, meticulously organized, as if no one really lived there. A place made to be admired, not to be a home. I'll have a room prepared for you. On the second floor, Edward broke the silence, his voice echoing through the empty space. Lucy blinked, turning her attention to him. A room? He nodded, taking off his jacket and handing it to an employee who appeared discreetly to receive it. Yes, you can choose anyone. She bit her lip, uncertain how she felt about that. You talk as if this is a temporary stay. Edward turned to her, his gaze evaluating her expression. Isn't it? Lucy didn't know what to answer immediately. Their marriage was an agreement, a contract. But for how long? And what would happen after? I don't know. She was honest. Edward watched her for a few more seconds before finally saying something that took her by surprise. You don't have to decide anything now. Rest. We'll talk tomorrow." And with that, he walked away, climbing the stairs with the naturalness of someone who undeniably belonged to that place. Lucy remained there for an instant, feeling out of place. Then, an employee showed her the way to her room, and she followed him in silence. When she entered the room that was now hers, she felt the impact of luxury. The bed was enormous, covered by soft, impeccably smooth sheets. There was a spacious dressing room, a bathroom with imported marble, and a balcony overlooking the gardens. Everything was perfect, and everything seemed wrong. She walked to the mirror by the dressing table and looked at her own reflection. She was still dressed in white. She still looked like a bride, but she didn't feel like one. She let out a long sigh and began to undo her hairstyle. Hair by hair, she removed the pins and hairpins, letting her hair fall freely over her shoulders. She took off her earrings, her necklace, her rings. Finally, she unbuttoned the dress and slid it off her body, leaving only the thin silk slip she wore underneath. She sat on the edge of the bed and ran her hands over her face. Everything had changed in a matter of hours. She was no longer Lucy Smith. She was no longer the woman who expected a marriage based on love and romantic promises. Now, she was Lucy Hayes. And the only certainty she had was that, from that moment on, there would be no turning back. A new life, a new name, but at what cost? What do you think the terms of this unconventional marriage will be? Share your predictions in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the fascinating developments. The following days were a whirlwind. Papers signed, names changed, contracts reviewed. Lucy Brooks officially ceased to exist, giving way to the new Mrs. Hayes. She still looked in the mirror and saw the same features, but everything around her screamed change. The small flat where she had lived for years was left behind. Her new home was something she had never imagined living in, an impeccable, cold, and majestic mansion, full of wide hallways, elegant furniture, and a silence that bordered on intimidating. Lucy adapted. Not immediately, but little by little, without letting the impact of the change overwhelm her. Edward was a man of firm habits and unbreakable rules. He wasn't intrusive, but he wasn't an easy man to decipher either. He didn't behave like a husband in the conventional sense. He didn't ask about her day, didn't force intimacy, didn't treat her like a fragile woman who needed to be cared for. But at the same time, he was there. Always. In the first week, when the newspapers began to spread the news of their sudden marriage, Edward handled everything unflustered. When the first speculations began to arise, he quelled them with a simple public appearance alongside Lucy, making it impossible for any rumor to reach her. When the disdainful glances of high society fell upon her, he lifted her to his side, as if she had belonged to that world all along. And she learned to belong. The Lucy who was once rejected without even a goodbye began to disappear. The woman taking shape now was someone who learned to speak firmly, who held gazes without faltering, who entered any room without feeling inferior. The press began to call her the luckiest woman in England, but she knew the truth. That wasn't luck. It was a choice. And as her new self came to life, Jack watched everything. He saw the photos in the newspapers, the videos on television, the events where Lucy appeared radiant alongside Edward. He heard the comments, the women praising her elegance, the men envying her position. Rage was a bitter taste in Jack's mouth. He had never been a man accustomed to losing. Everything in his life had come easy. Money, career, women. And Lucy? Lucy was by his side for so long that he believed she always would be. But now, there she was, beautiful, unreachable, untouchable. And not by being alone. Not by having decided to move on. But because another man had her. A more powerful, more respected man. A man who, in a few months, had transformed her into a woman Jack barely recognized. It was unbearable to see. The first time he saw them together was in a live television interview. Edward, always impeccable, sat beside her, a hand casually resting on the arm of her chair while Lucy spoke. Her voice was firm. The nervousness she used to show in public had disappeared. There was no longer that discreet insecurity in her gaze, nor that hesitant tone of someone always seeking approval. She smiled. Not that small, gentle smile Jack knew, but a smile of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Mrs. Hayes, your marriage surprised everyone. How did this sudden change in your life come about?" Lucy tilted her head slightly, as if pondering the answer. "Life is full of surprises. Sometimes what we believe to be a tragedy can, in reality, be a new beginning." Edward looked at her with a faint, discreet smile, but one full of meaning. Jack clenched his fists. He turned off the television before hearing the rest. But the headlines wouldn't let him forget. Lucy Brooks, from abandoned bride to wife of the country's most influential businessman. Luck or destiny. The woman who changed the rules in an unlikely marriage. Perfect wife. Lucy Brooks is now a reference in high society. Every word was a cruel reminder that he was no longer part of her story, but he refused to accept it. It was easy to find out where she would be that night. A charity event, one of those where Edward would make a public appearance and Lucy would be by his side. Jack never liked those things. He had always considered them boring, but that night he attended. He waited patiently until he found her alone, away from the crowd. Lucy was near a balcony, looking at the illuminated city, holding a glass of wine between her fingers. Her black dress accentuated her skin, and her hair was elegantly styled, revealing the delicate curve of her neck. She had always been beautiful, but now there was something different about her. An aura he had never noticed before. He approached. "You're different." His voice cut the silence. Lucy didn't turn immediately. She just took a sip of wine before replying. "Of course I am." He frowned, annoyed by her casual tone. She didn't seem surprised to see him, nor nervous. "You never liked these kinds of events." This time, she turned her face to look at him. Her gaze was impassive. "And you never liked seeing people evolve." Jack felt the sting of those words, but he ignored it. He hadn't come there to argue. He had come to remind Lucy of what they had had, what he was sure still existed between them. He moved a little closer. "You'll never truly love him." Lucy raised an eyebrow, as if bored. "Oh no, I was your first love," he insisted. "You still feel something for me." Silence stretched between them. For a moment, Jack thought she would falter, that she would look away, that she would bite her lip as she did when she was confused. But Lucy didn't falter. She took a step towards him, narrowing the distance between them, and he held his breath for a second, expecting any reaction that might mean she was still his. But what came was something he didn't expect. "The woman who loved you died at the altar that day. Today, I am someone else." The phrase was spoken with a cutting calm. There was no anger, no resentment, just an immutable fact. Jack had never felt such a strong punch to the gut as in that moment. She wasn't saying that to provoke him, nor to convince herself. She simply believed it. He opened his mouth to reply, but he had no chance. Edward appeared behind her, as if he had always been there. His gaze fell on Jack with absolute coldness, but unhurried, without ostentation. Lucy turned to her husband and handed him her wine glass, as if that conversation had been just a momentary distraction. "Shall we go?" Edward took the glass without taking his eyes off Jack. "Of course." And without looking back, Lucy walked away with him, leaving Jack alone on the balcony, swallowing the bitter taste of loss. But if he thought she would accept that, he was wrong. If she no longer wanted to be his, then he would do everything possible to destroy everything she was building. A powerful confrontation. Lucy has found her strength, but Jack is not giving up. What lengths do you think he will go to destroy her newfound peace? Share your theories in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the thrilling downfall. Jack lost her. He knew it, but he wouldn't accept it. He couldn't. He still saw her in the newspapers, at events by Edward's side. Always perfect, always haughty. Her eyes no longer sought him. His name no longer existed in her life. But the obsession grew inside him like a wound that wouldn't heal. He tried to ignore it. He tried to move on. But with every photo, with every headline, with every appearance of her, something inside him churned. How could it be so easy for her? How could she be so fine without him? 8 years together, and now she wouldn't even look at him. He needed to reverse that. It was then that he found the perfect opportunity. Lucy would attend a gala event, one of the most important of the year. Edward, due to business commitments, would arrive later. That meant she would be alone for a few hours. Jack didn't hesitate. When Lucy left the main reception and walked towards the outdoor garden, he knew it was the right moment. He followed her discreetly, and then approached unhurriedly, letting his presence be felt before she turned. "You never liked being surrounded by too many people for long." His voice cut the night silence. Lucy wasn't startled, but she also didn't show surprise. She just turned slowly and looked at him. Her eyes, once so easy to read, were now an unbreakable wall. "What do you want, Jack?" He smiled, crossing his arms. "I just want to talk. You have nothing left to talk about with me." "Oh, but I do." Jack took a step towards her, watching her. She didn't retreat, nor look away. He knew the old Lucy would have been nervous, perhaps even a little hesitant. But the woman in front of him was different. She no longer saw him as a threat, and that infuriated him. "I know why you're with Edward," he said, every word laden with venom. Lucy raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "You married him because it was the only way to escape humiliation, because it was convenient, because he offered you a name, status, power." She let out a low, humorless laugh. "Is that all you see?" "It's the truth," Jack insisted. "You can pretend whatever you want, but deep down you know it will never truly be his. Edward will never look at you the way I looked at you. He'll never love you the way I loved you." Lucy closed her eyes for a brief instant, and when she looked at him again, her expression was one of pure indifference. "What exactly do you want, Jack? For me to cry? For me to say I regret it? I want you to stop lying to yourself." He moved even closer, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I want you to admit you still feel something for me." Lucy laughed, this time a genuine laugh. "You don't understand, do you?" Jack frowned. "What?" With a firmness that left no room for doubt. "I don't need you, Jack. I never needed you. I choose to be by Edward's side, not out of obligation, but out of love." Jack felt the blow like a punch. For a moment, everything around him fell silent. Those words resonated in his mind, each one piercing his arrogance, his pride, his obsession. He opened his mouth to say something, but he couldn't. There were no more arguments, excuses, or manipulations, and at that moment, Jack realized he lost her forever. This time, for real. And then, Lucy did what she should have done a long time ago. She turned and walked away. She left him there, standing in the middle of the garden, while she walked back to the ballroom, to her life, to Edward. And she didn't even look back. Jack's world crumbles. What do you think his next desperate move will be to reclaim his lost pride? Share your predictions for his ultimate downfall in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the ultimate confrontation. Jack was never the type to accept losing. And losing Lucy in that way, being replaced by Edward Hayes, exposed as a discardable man, was not something he could let pass. He watched his name disappear from conversations, saw his prestige overshadowed by Lucy's growth beside her husband. He saw the glances that once held respect now carry something close to disdain. In the first few days, he tried to ignore it. He convinced himself it was just a phase, that Lucy was nothing more than a wounded woman trying to prove a point. But then she started to grow. She began to be respected, admired, seen as an influential woman. And Jack realized that the story he had told himself, that Lucy still loved him, that she would one day return to him, was nothing more than an illusion. Rage came like a wave. If she no longer wanted to be his, then he would make sure to destroy everything she was building. The first blow was subtle, almost imperceptible. A comment dropped in a conversation with a journalist, an insinuation planted at the right moment. Something small, but enough to sow a seed of doubt. Do you really believe this sudden love story? Don't be naive. What happened there was an agreement, a marriage of convenience. The rumors began to spread like wildfire. In a few weeks, gossip blogs were filled with headlines implying that Lucy had always had ulterior motives in approaching Edward, that from the beginning she knew Jack wasn't her best option and used the marriage as a social climb. The words were careful, never direct, but filled with enough venom to make people question. Lucy Brooks, from abandoned bride to millionaire's wife. Coincidence or strategy? Does Mrs. Hayes's whirlwind marriage hide secrets? Did Edward Hayes marry for love or for a business alliance? Lucy saw the news as soon as it appeared, but she didn't react. Edward, however, noticed the tension in her body as she scrolled through her phone screen and read the headlines one by one. "This won't last," was all she said. But she underestimated Jack. He wouldn't settle for rumors. He wanted to destroy her reputation. Days later, the bomb exploded. A famous influencer, known for exposing celebrity secrets, published a video hinting that Lucy always had ulterior motives in approaching Edward. That from the beginning, she knew Jack wasn't her best option and used the marriage as a social climb. We have sources confirming that this marriage was a contract, an agreement to maintain appearances and consolidate business. Do you really believe a man like Edward Hayes would fall in love with a woman who, until months ago, was nobody? The comments were divided. Some defended Lucy, but others fueled the scandal. And that was exactly what Jack wanted. Questions began to reach reporters at events. People whispered every time Lucy passed by. And for the first time, she felt the weight of being married to a man who attracted constant attention. She didn't back down. But Edward noticed that it made her uncomfortable. That night, when the rumors were at their peak, he found her sitting in the living room of the enormous mansion, holding a glass of wine without drinking it. "Do you want me to sort this out?" His voice was low, unhurried. Lucy looked up at him. "This will pass." Edward tilted his head, observing her. "Of course it will, but I don't like letting people attack what's mine." Lucy let out a short laugh. "What's yours?" "Yes." Edward took a step forward. "You are my wife, and I don't let anyone disrespect my wife." There was something in the way he said it that made Lucy keep her gaze on his for longer than she should have. Edward didn't seem annoyed. He didn't seem agitated. But there was a cold determination in him. She didn't ask what he would do. She didn't need to. 2 days later, the newspapers changed their tone. Edward not only debunked the rumors, but he destroyed Jack in the process. Documents were leaked to the press, showing Jack's fraudulent businesses, his betrayals of Lucy and other women over the years, corruption schemes he kept secret. On television, Edward gave an interview alongside Lucy. The reporter, hesitant, tried to touch on the rumors about the marriage. Many say your marriage to Lucy was a strategy. What do you have to say about that? Edward looked directly at the camera. I would say those people should mind their own business, because mine is very well sorted. The response went viral. But the final blow came from Lucy. At an event, when a journalist insisted on asking about the gossip, she simply smiled and said calmly, "The truth always comes out. I don't need to defend myself from lies, because my life speaks for itself." The tables have turned. Jack's schemes have backfired spectacularly. What do you think this shared victory means for Edward and Lucy's relationship? Share your relief and predictions in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the beautiful conclusion. The night was already well underway when Edward and Lucy left the event. The car glided smoothly through the illuminated streets of London, cutting through the silent early hours of the morning. Inside the vehicle, Lucy kept her gaze lost in the scenery, but her mind was elsewhere. Jack was no longer a shadow in her life. There were no more doubts, no more resentment, no more bitterness. She only felt peace. Edward drove unhurriedly, his expression always calculated, but his fingers tapped softly on the steering wheel, as if something inside him was about to overflow. When they stopped in front of the immense mansion, he turned off the engine, but made no move to get out. Lucy noticed and turned to him. "What are you thinking about?" He remained silent for a moment, watching her with that intense gaze that always made her hold her breath. Then he sighed, ran a hand over his face, and smiled in a way she didn't often see. A genuine smile, without the mask of the powerful man who always needed to have everything under control. "I'm thinking about how you changed my life." She frowned slightly, surprised by the confession. "Me?" Edward nodded, running his fingers over her face, tracing her chin and then her cheek with a delicacy that contrasted with his usual firmness. "When I saw you at that registry office, I saw a wounded woman, but not a broken one. I saw someone who could get back up, even after being destroyed. And at that moment, without realizing it, I made the most important decision of my life." Lucy felt her heart pound faster. "Edward!" He smiled faintly, but his eyes shone with something deeper. "At first, I thought this marriage was just an agreement. But day after day, you became something I never knew I needed. You didn't just gain respect. You gained me." She remained silent, absorbing every word. "I fell in love with you, Lucy." Time seemed to stop. The words, spoken with such clarity, were like a shock of reality. It wasn't just a convenient marriage. It never was. "You what?" Edward smiled, and this time, there was no room for doubt. "I love you." Lucy felt something inside her warm, as if all the pieces that were once broken were finally in place. "I love you too." Her voice came out low, but firm. Edward waited for nothing more. He held her face with both hands and kissed her. But it wasn't a kiss like others. It wasn't a formality, nor a simple display of affection. It was the complete surrender of two hearts that had finally found their home in each other. From that moment, there were no contracts, no past, no doubts. Only they existed. 2 years later, the newspapers published the headline, with a photo of Edward and Lucy leaving a hospital, he holding a small blue bundle in his arms while looking at his wife with absolute pride. The Hayes heir is born. Lucy and Edward celebrate the arrival of their first child. Lucy's happiness was there, in every detail of that new life. Not because she married a powerful man, but because she chose to marry the man who truly loved her. And this time, it was forever. Lucy didn't look back because there was nothing there for her anymore. The past had been buried in that garden, along with Jack's last words, along with any trace of the woman who once believed in him. She walked back to the ballroom unhurriedly, without uncertainties, without a single vestige of doubt. Now she knew exactly who she was. When she entered, Edward was already there. Tall, impeccable as always, surrounded by important people who seemed to absorb every word he said. But the instant Lucy reappeared, his eyes found her. They needed no questions, no explanations. He simply saw. For a second, the world around them seemed to slow down. Edward followed her with his gaze as she approached, and there was something there, something different from all the other times they had crossed paths at public events or meetings. Something deeper, more attentive. It was a gaze that didn't analyze her as a successful agreement or as a valuable piece in his power game. It was a gaze that saw her. Lucy stopped beside him, and Edward slid his hand to the small of her back, guiding her close. It wasn't a gesture of possession. It was something deeper, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. "Is everything all right?" he asked in a low voice, for her alone to hear. Lucy nodded slightly, feeling secure in his presence. Yes. His gaze remained on her longer than necessary. He didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press. He just made a small gesture with his hand, calling a waiter, and took a glass of champagne before extending it to Lucy. "You handled him well." She accepted the glass and brought it to her lips, without taking her eyes off his. "He no longer has power over me." Edward tilted his head slightly, a half smile touching his lips. "I know." For some reason, the way he said it made her stomach churn in a strange way. A new song began to play, and some people headed towards the dance floor. Lucy watched the couples, their elegant movements, the soft laughter exchanged between raised glasses and knowing glances. It had been so long since she had done something as simple as dance that, for a moment, she forgot what it was like. "Do you like waltzes?" Edward's voice interrupted her thoughts. She blinked and turned to him, surprised by the question. "I don't know. I've never really danced one." He seemed to ponder for a second before extending his hand to her. "It's time to learn." Lucy hesitated, her eyes moving from his extended hand to his face. Edward Hayes, the meticulously calculated man, was there, in front of her, inviting her to something that was not part of any contract. She should have refused, but she didn't. She placed her glass on a passing waiter's tray and placed her hand over his. Edward led her to the center of the ballroom, and the instant their hands touched, something different coursed through her skin. He placed a firm hand on her waist, and she gently rested her fingers on his shoulder. The first chords of the music filled the air, and they began to move. Lucy never imagined that dancing with Edward Hayes would feel so natural. He guided her with ease, effortlessly, as if he knew exactly where every step should fall. But what unsettled her most was the way he looked at her. It wasn't a cold, analytical gaze. It was a gaze of recognition. And for an instant, Lucy felt afraid. Not of the man in front of her, but of how her heart beat a little faster. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave your comments. Your support means the world to me.